Mumuka. My precious ones, one whole chapter in a single breath. Read with care, treasure each word. The exciting story begins now. My rival in love posted something on Mobo. Attached were two pictures. The first one was a screenshot of a VChat conversation and offered to bring her back to my side on VChat. A very, very long message, Benevo. Every word, every punctuation mark was trampling on my dignity and self-respect. The second picture was of Liu Ryan peeling shrimp for her. Her caption read, "Hey, this is the person that other boys dream about," followed by a proud little emoji. My world collapsed at that moment. Suddenly, I realized I didn't love her anymore. It was a strange feeling. This person who was once with me day and night. I looked at her and felt no ripple in my heart. Even the smallest actions no longer moved me. I looked at her as if she were just any stranger on the street, but I didn't show a hint of it. I still took good care of her. Prepared breakfast on the dining table at around 7 in the morning. A glass of perfectly warm water on the bedside table. The toothpaste already squeezed onto her toothbrush in the bathroom. Before I left, I used the remote to adjust the air conditioner, raised the temperature a little, then stood at the bedroom door and said to her, "I'm going to work now." Her whole face sank into the snow white sheets. She mumbled sleepily in response. I turned and left. Recently, I took on a new project. The whole team was insanely busy. After sorting out the initial details, I checked the time. It was already close to 1 a.m. I suddenly realized that the whole day, I hadn't thought of her even once. This wasn't normal. I remembered back when I just graduated. Duen Yan was working with a senior from college who had been organizing events for a long time. It was the same back then, often working late into the night. But every hour, I would still send her a message to update her on my status. If it was past 6, I would tell her roughly how late I would be that night and remind her not to wait up for me, and so on. Even after being together for a long time, I would always give her a heads up if I was busy at night. But today, I hadn't thought of her even once. I opened VChat to check. She had sent me a message around 7, asking when I would be back. I hadn't seen it. I had never taken more than 3 minutes to reply to her messages. I rubbed my phone, hesitated for a moment, but still didn't reply to her message. I walked out of the company gate and saw her, elegantly leaning against her pink sports car, her long hair flowing in the breeze. Her head bowed as she looked at her phone, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, her face full of happiness. I took a deep breath. There was an inexplicable sense of disgust in my heart. I knew. In love, the one who loves the most is always more humble. This relationship had been imbalanced from the very beginning. I made myself too humble. That's why she seemed so indifferent. I slowly approached. She was probably chatting with someone, engrossed in the conversation. Even when I stood right in front of her, she didn't notice me. I asked softly, "Why are you here?" She suddenly came to her senses and hurriedly hid her phone behind her. I wanted to ask who she was chatting with so intently, but after opening my mouth, I still didn't ask. I despairingly realized I no longer cared about her. She looked at me for a moment, as if waiting for something. Her eyes, in the darkness, seemed to flicker briefly, then return to the shadows. In a slightly hoarse voice, she said, "I came to pick you up." She paused, then added another sentence, as if feeling a bit wronged, saying, "You didn't reply to my message." I pretended to take out my phone and glanced at it, then said, "Too busy. Didn't see it." She didn't say anything, opened the car door for me to get in. This was an unusual act of thoughtfulness. To her, I was obtained too easily, loved too humbly. I thanked to her. The most certain thing was that I would never leave her. So she would call me and I'd come, wave me away and I'd go. This kind of late night pickup only happened during the period when she felt guilty, and never again after that. I got into the car, leaned against the window, and stared outside at the rushing lights passing by. The car was silent. I thought back to the past. She was actually a bit distant. When we were alone before, I would always find topics to make her talk. She would occasionally respond with a simple hem. But now I'm tired. After a moment of silence, she asked me, "Have you eaten?" I replied with a I didn't ask if she had eaten. When she woke me up, I realized I didn't know when I had fallen asleep. She frowned at me and said again, "You're very tired lately, aren't you? If you're tired, just rest for a while. It's not a big deal to skip that shift. Can I take care of you?" I didn't say a word. When she was exhausted in the past, I was the one asking her this. At that time, her business was just getting on track. I was exhausted every day. The office politics were wearing me out. So after one late night of overtime, I hugged her and acted like a child, asking her, "Should I quit and come back? Give you the chance to take care of me?" She smiled, changed the subject, and said, "Gee, my dear classmate, keep going, keep going." After that, I never asked such a silly question again. Now that she brought it up, I looked up at her and smiled, said nothing, just like she used to. I once loved her very much, so much that even my friends were amazed, half jokingly, half seriously advising me, "Boda, don't get too deep into this." But I was like a moth crashing into a flame. From the first moment I saw her, I knew there was no going back for me. I met Liu Ryan in my sophomore year. Before that, I had only heard her name. She was a prominent figure at university, with a calm, gentle demeanor and a striking appearance. Her face captivated all the boys at the school. It was said that her boyfriends were as numerous as fish crossing a river. That I could finally emerge victorious and sit firmly as her official boyfriend was something I thought about for a long time. I could only attribute it to fate. Fate had her meet me at the most difficult time of her life. Fate had her calm down during that period. Fate made sure that during that time, she didn't meet another fool who would treat her as well as I did. And so I became her boyfriend. And from then on, we went through 7 years of breaking up and getting back together, shocking our friends, both hers and mine. According to one of her friends, we were completely different people from different worlds. I was someone with a clear purpose, excelled academically, and every step of my life was carefully planned. She was different. She was indifferent to everything, always living one day at a time, never showing any seriousness toward anything. She wasn't just indifferent, she was also fickle, drifting through the colorful world of flowers and plants, touched by many leaves but never letting one stay. Oh, no! To be precise, when I met her, she had just ended her last relationship. Even though I was with Liu Ryan for 7 years, Gu Wuyan was the only ex whose name struck fear into me whenever I heard it. I believe he was the only boy she truly felt for and loved deeply. The first time I met Liu Ryan was at a club event. She was half leaning against the doorframe of the club, playing on her phone. Her side profile was flawless. I couldn't help but glance at her a couple more times. A junior next to me, half envious and half sighing, said, "That's Liu Ryan, huh? She's probably waiting for her boyfriend." I looked in the direction her chin pointed and saw a tall figure from behind. I didn't see his face, but I imagined he must be handsome. The second time I met her was late at night outside the campus. I was representing the school in a debate competition in the capital. After the competition, I rushed back to school overnight. It was late at night then, and a heavy rain was pouring down. I got out of the taxi and ran through the rain toward the school gate. Then I saw her at the entrance. At first, I didn't recognize her. A shadowy figure was leaning against the corner of the campus wall. I hesitated for a moment, then turned on my phone's flashlight and walked over to take a look. It was her, slumped unconscious against the wall. The rain had soaked her hair, plastering it to her forehead. Gone was her usual arrogant and carefree aura. She actually looked a bit pitiful. Maybe it was beauty clouding my judgment, but seeing her there, I lost my last bit of hesitation. I called a taxi and took her to the hospital. She had drunk too much, and the heavy rain had brought on a high fever. Later, I often joked with her, saying that I had saved her life. Whether or not I really did, I don't know. I only knew that I almost lost my life in the process. I stayed by her side until she woke up that day. Her eyes were somewhat dazed. I stood by her bed, smiling, and said to her, "Hello, Senior Liu. I am G. Boda. Last night's medical expenses totaled 2,456 yuan. The taxi fare was 147 yuan. Add me on WeChat and transfer it to me." She came to her senses and squinted her eyes slightly, smiling. That nonchalant demeanor returned, and it made my heart beat like a drum. She stayed in the hospital for 7 days. Every day, I brought her chicken soup, up until the day she was discharged. She finally remembered my name. Then she curled her lips and smiled, and asked me, "Are you chasing me?" Sunlight streamed through the small window, and you could see tiny specks of dust in the air. I pretended to be serious, and asked her back, "You just realized?" Later, I pursued her for 6 months and 3 days. On the 4th day, which was Christmas, we were eating at a restaurant outside the campus. I was concentrating on peeling shrimp for her. Then I heard her say, "G. Boda, let's be together." My hands paused while peeling the shrimp, paused for a long time. In the end, I didn't look up, continued peeling the shrimp while softly replying, "All right." It was such an insignificant and plain beginning. She didn't mention liking me, didn't talk about feelings, just casually said, "Let's be together." And I eagerly rushed towards her. But at that time, I was genuinely happy. After finishing the meal, I happily took a taxi alone and went to the hospital for an hour-long drip. Because I am allergic to seafood, yet I was truly full of joy. The next day, I woke up and it was already 8 a.m. It was rare for me to wake up so late, probably because I was really exhausted the night before. When I woke up, I was lying on my back properly. Even without the blanket, I still felt a bit hot. She is very afraid of the cold. The air conditioner in the room was always set to the highest temperature when we first started living together. I couldn't get used to it, often waking up from the heat in the middle of the night. She would wrap herself in the blanket and burrow into my arms, her hands and feet climbing onto my body, saying it was like hugging a stove. At first, I was very impatient, not accustomed to sleeping like this. Every time she snuggled over, I would impatiently push her away. But it didn't take long for me to get used to it. However, recently, I don't know why. Since I became aware of it, it's probably been 4 or 5 months. One morning, I suddenly realized that she hadn't woken up in my arms for a long time. Every night when she felt cold, she would curl herself up as much as possible. Even though I was right next to her, even though she could sense the warmth not far away, even in her unconscious, sleepy state. But the truth is, for a very long time, I hadn't rolled over to her side. This is really not a good sign. Today, for once, she woke up before me. Barefoot, she silently stepped onto the carpet and walked out. I saw her standing on the balcony. In this kind of morning light, her brows were tightly knitted, probably deep in thought. Her face was still as handsome as when I first saw her. I carefully observed her for a long time, and then realized my heart was calm without a single ripple. She seemed to sense my gaze, and our eyes met, separated by a pane of glass. We stood silently facing each other, not far apart. It took her over 10 minutes to come back inside. I casually asked, "Something on your mind?" She remained silent for a long time. I heard her softly say, By the time I finished brushing my teeth and came out, she had already returned with breakfast from the bun shop a distance away from our complex. She said that place had the best buns. I used to buy them for her every day. I asked her, what filling? She replied, 1 crab roe, 1 lobster. These were the flavors I used to buy her. I silently put down the half-eaten bun. She looked at me, surprised, raising her brows in silent inquiry. I was truly tired. A sudden wave of fatigue swept over me. I said, I'm allergic to seafood. Though it had improved quite a lot by now. Probably from peeling too many shrimp and crabs for her over the years. My body had developed some immunity. For so many years, I had endured it all. But now, all of a sudden, those things I once endured with ease and sweetness, I could no longer bear them. She looked at me. She stared at me for a long time. I thought if she had looked at me like this before, I probably would have already wrapped my arms around her and kissed her on the lips. Her expression shifted slightly. She lifted her hand, probably wanting to touch my head or my cheek. My body reacted before my mind, and I quickly stepped back, avoiding her hand. Her hand awkwardly hovered in midair. I saw her quickly turn her head, taking a deep breath. When she turned back, her expression was calm again. She asked, what filling do you like? I'll go buy it again. We both maintained a calm and false sense of peace. I replied, no need. I'll fry an egg in the kitchen. She didn't say anything. I noticed her hand hanging by her side, clenched into a fist. She wasn't a person with a good temper. I had seen her lose her temper with others before. Back in college, there was a time she encountered a creepy guy. She nearly beat him up. She had to pay quite a bit in medical expenses that time. Later, when she had just graduated and started her business, she endured a period of swallowing her pride. But as her business grew, no one dared to act tough in front of her anymore. Most people were accommodating toward her. Just when I thought she was about to explode, she suddenly laughed. Then she said softly, all right, let's go shopping later today. The season is changing soon. There are many things we need to replace. To be honest, when she held back her temper, I was actually a bit disappointed. We've been together for 7 years. We know each other's personalities and temperaments so well. She must have sensed my abnormal behavior and coldness. I actually wished she would lose her temper, point at me and ask, what's wrong with you? Can't you just say it? Then I could naturally say, I don't love you anymore. Let's break up. But unfortunately, she didn't ask. So I didn't say anything. In the afternoon, we went to the supermarket together. I have always had a special fondness for grocery shopping because it feels like being an ordinary couple. Pushing the cart with her, buying household items. It really feels like we are just a regular married couple. In the past, when I shopped with her, I wished I could spend the whole day with her in the supermarket. Every few steps, I would ask her, does this look good? This would be so cute in the kitchen. Look at that, ha ha. How about we buy matching toothbrush cups? They're so cute. This would look great hanging in the entryway. By the end, she would get so annoyed and yell, shut up, while looking at the shrimp all seasoning. I could never contain my joy around her. I wanted to share everything I thought was the best with her. That joy was genuine, just being by her side. No matter what we were doing, even just breathing would make me happy. Clearly, in other people's eyes, I was a mature, cold person. But today, after more than half an hour of shopping, I looked at the shopping cart and realized I hadn't said much to her at all and only picked up a few necessities. I already said to her, we've got everything, let's head back. On the way home, she remained silent. As we were nearing the house, she suddenly spoke, have you been too tired lately? After this project is finished, take some time off. Let's go to Morocco together. Haven't you always wanted to go? She paused for a moment, then added, "What I said earlier about you quitting and me supporting you. I wasn't joking. Honestly, I felt a bit suppressed. Liu Ryan is actually quite a detached person when it comes to emotions. She fears responsibility the most and is also afraid of burdens. In the past, she feared the burden of my feelings. Now, she fears the burden of my life." For her to say such a thing. In the past, I probably would have been moved to tears, overwhelmed with gratitude. But now, I wasn't. I was stunned for a second and gently refused her. "No need. I like my job now." This kind of refusal was too direct and awkward, especially since I had rarely refused her before. It seemed, without realizing it, that Liu Ryan and I had completely switched places. The one who was absent-minded and indifferent was now me. The one who was enduring and silently bearing everything was now her. I saw her take a deep breath. I've said before, she really isn't a person with a good temper, but she paused for a moment and then continued to ask gently, "What about Morocco? After you're done with this busy period, let's go on a vacation together." I responded with a reserved and distant smile. "I've already been." Liu Ryan. For years ago, I went alone. We had a huge breakup. Actually, over the 7 years, I broke up and got back together with her many times. But the only time I truly uttered the word breakup was 4 years ago. That breakup was really messy. During that period, I nearly exhausted all my expectations and passion for life. At one point, I doubted if I could hold on any longer. 4 years ago, I had just started working. That time was extremely exhausting, both mentally and physically. It caused me to lose the energy to constantly accommodate and take care of her while interacting with Liu Ryan. Naturally, I didn't notice her strange behavior. For example, her daydreaming and blank stares were getting longer, and she was coming back and later. I realized something was wrong. One night when I returned late after working overtime, as soon as I opened the door, the lights were all on. She was just sitting on the couch in the living room. The glass door to the balcony wasn't open. She was leaning against the sofa cushion. The crystal chandelier above her head cast shadows over her body, exposing all her emotions without a trace. She said expressionlessly, "Let's break up." She let out a deep sigh, then added, "I'm sorry. There's no going back. I no longer want to recall that weightless time. I've always considered myself an independent and rational person. When I saw many friends suffering over love, I would always think love should be mutual. Only two-way love has meaning. To put it simply, love can be intense, but dignity and decency must always be maintained." But after Liu Ryan suggested breaking up, I became the kind of person I used to scorn the most. It felt like my heart was being brutally ripped out. I lost over 10 pounds in just a week. During that time, I sent her countless humble messages begging for reconciliation, but without exception, they all disappeared into the void. Eventually, one of my friends couldn't stand it anymore and slapped me hard on the back. Frustrated by my lack of self-respect, "Jiboda, have some self-respect, will you? Forget her and start a new life. You're acting like you're dying." Well, she's probably living it up right now, carefree and happy. Why don't you try to make yourself happy too? The tears I had been holding back poured out. I said desperately, word by word, "I don't know if she's happy or not, but Itu Makoto, I know I will never be happy again. The only way I can be happy is to go back to the past, back to the time when she was by my side. I don't care if she likes me or not. As long as she's by my side, that's enough. Only then can I be happy." How pathetic is that? He looked at me for a long time, then turned his head and wiped his eyes. After more than 5 months, I could finally manage a somewhat normal routine. My friends seemed to think I had recovered, but I felt like a rat living in a dark sewer, secretly stalking every update on her social media platforms. They were traveling together, celebrating holidays together. She gave him grand surprises. Their sweet videos and photos together. In the first 3 years I was with her, we didn't take a single photo together. She didn't like to smile. And in her photos with Gu Wuyan, she also wasn't smiling, but their atmosphere was gentle. In the photos, Liu Ryan didn't have that indifference and perfunctory attitude she had with me. She looked up at the boy beside her with soft, gentle eyes. This was a treatment I never received. What truly hurt me was a social media post from Gu Wuyan. He posted on Mobo with 2 photos attached. The first was a screenshot of a WeChat conversation. It was a message I sent to Liu Ryan after the breakup, begging her to come back to me on WeChat. A very long message. Every word, every punctuation mark was me trampling on my own dignity and self-respect. The second photo was of Liu Ryan lowering her head, peeling shrimp for him. His caption read, "Ha ha! This is the person that other boys dream about," followed by a proud little emoji. My world collapsed at that moment. I thought I might die at that very moment, but I somehow managed to survive. After that, I went to Morocco alone. While crossing the Sahara Desert, I almost buried myself in the endless orange red dunes. But eventually, I came back. I returned to my previous state of life, sleeping normally, socializing, working normally. Occasionally, when someone mentioned Liu Ryan, I could just smile and brush it off without a care. Until Liu Ryan and Gu Wuyan broke up again. Their personalities, in truth, were not suited to be together forever. One was too easygoing and carefree, the other too arrogant and domineering. When a conflict arose, neither of them was willing to compromise for the other. Just like in the song Lin Jia sang, "You and her did not get what you wanted." Within just half a year, they started to fall apart. My love remained unchanged. Even I was amazed by myself. So on the 28th day after her breakup with Gu Wuyan, I sent Liu Ryan a message. I asked if she wanted to come out for a drink. She came, and then we got back together. This move shocked all of our friends. Itu Makoto was furious, pointing at my nose and yelling for me to wake up. He even threatened to end our friendship to snap me out of it. But there was nothing I could do. I remained calm and composed, but I couldn't control my heart. I watched Itu Makoto beat his chest in frustration, and I told him, if I could, I would cut this heart out with a knife. I knew it wasn't worth it, but I really couldn't control myself. Itu Makoto, I know I've humbled myself into the dust, but Itu Makoto, when she came back to me, I was truly happy. It wasn't until Itu Makoto came over with a tissue to wipe the tears from my face that I realized I didn't even know why. By then, my face was already covered in tears. Who wouldn't want to be decisive and assertive? Who wouldn't want to stand proud in a relationship, looking down from a place of pride? Who wants their heart to be repeatedly ground into the dust, only to pick it up again and humbly present it to that person to be trampled on once more? I didn't want that either, but there was no choice. I truly had no choice. As long as there was the slightest chance to stay by her side, I could overlook everything else. As long as my heart kept beating, I would give everything I had. But I never imagined that one day, my feelings for Liu Ryan would stop beating before my heart did. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't even know when it began, when I lost my feelings for her. In fact, in recent years, she had been very good to me. Even Itu Makoto would sometimes look at me and sigh. Thankfully, we survived those tough times. Now, Liu Ryan is the perfect image of a wealthy, beautiful woman. Rich, good-looking, and uninterested in other men. It seemed like my bad luck had finally turned around. I just smiled then, and didn't say a word. At first, I thought I was just going through a period of fatigue. Perhaps it was just a mood swing. I thought it would pass with time. I could see Liu Ryan's carefulness, and how much she was restraining her temper. Maybe, apart from Gu Wuyan, she had never made such concessions for anyone in her life. But every time I saw her, I felt irritated and restless. This situation lasted for a while. My heart softened during one of my feverish colds. I was lying on the bed, feeling dizzy and dazed. When I half awoke, the whole room was completely silent. Supporting myself against the wall, I struggled through the dizziness to walk outside. When I went to the living room to get water, I saw her in the kitchen making porridge. She was standing, her body slightly bent, watching over a clay pot, muttering softly, "Simmer over low heat for 30 minutes. I took a sip of water, quietly went back to the bedroom. I didn't know how much time had passed when she came in and woke me up. On the table was a familiar takeout porridge. I didn't ask about it. When she was cleaning up the containers after the meal, she was a bit clumsy, and I heard her softly hiss. I immediately looked up and asked, "What's wrong?" She hesitated for a moment, then, as if feeling a bit wronged, she raised her hand in front of me. On the back of her hand was a shiny blister. It seemed like a burn. She said, "I wanted to make porridge." "And the porridge?" She paused subtly for a moment, then replied, "It was inedible. I threw it in the trash." She was probably pretending to be pitiful. Back then, she had gotten into a fight with someone over Gu Wuyan, broke a bone, and didn't utter a single complaint. Now, this small burn was even less worth mentioning. But strangely, my heart softened a little. My instinct acted before my mind. I took her hand, gently blew on it, and asked her, "Did you put any ointment on it?" Her hand stiffened instantly in my palm. Before I could react, she suddenly pulled me into her embrace, holding me tightly. Her chin pressed against the top of my head. She held me so tightly that my bones ached slightly. I quietly let her hold me. After a long while, I heard her voice, low and almost soft, as if afraid to wake something up. She said, "Boater, just like this. Don't become someone I don't recognize." I remained silent, not answering her. We seemed to have returned to how we used to be. I was good at hiding my emotions, but after this, in our interactions, I couldn't tell if what we had was love that had settled or just habit, or if I was simply waiting for a breaking point. Such a breaking point came sooner than I had expected. After the second quarter's project ended, the team organized a dinner party to relax and unwind a bit. Before leaving the company, I sent her a message. Lately, she often came to pick me up from work when she had nothing to do. I quickly received a reply. She said, "I'll wait for you at home." I looked at the message and smiled softly, pressing my lips together. By the time the dinner ended, it was almost 11. Since there were many people from the team, we had booked a private room. As I left the room and passed through the lobby, I casually glanced around and saw Gu Wuyan. Gu Wuyan has always been my nightmare. This man, he's not necessarily exceptional, but every time he appears, my psychological defenses crumble once more. I can't help but feel defeated and inferior. This is the shadow left from being deeply hurt in my youth. At that moment, even my breathing felt slightly suffocated. The hotel's hanging lights were dazzlingly bright, faces filled with smiles. It was both familiar and foreign to me. As my gaze shifted slightly, I saw the woman sitting across from him. My familiarity with Liu Ryan was such that even if she were breathing 5 meters away, I could sense her presence, not to mention recognizing her from the back. Just a few hours ago, she texted me saying she was waiting for me at home. The shock probably only lasted a moment. Once I understood the scene before me, I strangely found myself completely clear-headed. All the emotions brewing inside me instantly vanished. Gu Wuyan glanced over in my direction, noticed me and froze for a moment. Then he slightly nodded at me and gave a faint smile. I smiled back, then walked over. Liu Ryan's face turned pale for a moment. Looking at me, she almost instinctively said, "I didn't lie to you." I calmly replied, "What's wrong with an old friend having dinner together? It's rare for Mr. Gu to come back. It's only right for you to be a good host." Her expression was strange, as if she didn't expect this reaction from me. Her gaze was almost scrutinizing as she looked at me. I calmly smiled at her again and said, "Do you have the house key?" "I forgot to bring mine." She instinctively got up, took her coat from the back of the chair, and said, "I'll go with you." I shook my head. "No need. There's no reason to leave someone halfway through a meal. You guys eat first. I'm heading out." I wasn't sure how natural and calm my expression was. What was strange was that a few years ago, just hearing this man's name would make me feel like I was facing an enemy. But now, seeing Liu Ryan having dinner with him, I actually felt nothing at all. No thoughts crossed my mind. My heart was completely quiet. I even went back and took a shower, not quite sure when I fell asleep. When I woke up, it was midnight. A dark shadow sat on the living room sofa. Then I turned on the light. She was sitting silently on the couch. I was startled and asked her, "Why aren't you going to bed?" She didn't reply. I stood at the bedroom door looking at her. She spoke up. "There's really nothing between him and me. After you sent the text, he called me, but I didn't answer. Then he told me he's moving to the US permanently. This was his last time here, and he wanted to say a proper goodbye." I nodded. "All right. I got it." I opened the living room's French window, looked at her and asked, "Why haven't you showered yet?" She didn't respond and continued speaking. "I was so afraid you'd misunderstand." On my way rushing back, I kept thinking about how I should explain it to you, especially when there were no lights on at home. I thought you had left, but when I turned on the lights, I saw you sleeping in the bedroom. You were sleeping so soundly, you didn't even notice when I opened the door. She looked up at me. Her beautiful face seemed a bit weary. The corners of her eyes were red. She looked at me, speaking each word slowly. In that moment, I almost wished you had left. I paused, softly explaining, "Sorry, I was just a bit tired today." "Do you still care about me?" She abruptly interrupted, asking directly, "Do you still care about me?" I don't know if you've noticed, but it's been a long time since you reached out to me first. You don't constantly accommodate me anymore. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't refute what she said. I didn't even know the reason behind these signs. I hadn't fallen for anyone else, and she had always stayed the same. But I had suddenly changed, suddenly stopped loving her. She watched me in silence. Then, agitated, she picked up the wine glass from the coffee table. After drinking, she seemed even more restless. Her temper had always been bad, and now, somewhat recklessly, she asked me, "What do you want, Jiboter? Do you want to break up?" I remained silent for a long time, finally speaking to continue her words. I said, "All right, let's break up." This was the first time I had ever said break up. She placed the wine glass back on the table, stood up, and fiercely kicked the coffee table. The marble coffee table shifted sideways from the force. With red eyes, she shouted at me, "Fine. If you want to break up, then let's break up. Do you think I can't live without you?" Then she slammed the door and left. The bang was deafening. I didn't know where she went. Probably spent the night in her car. I stood there for an hour, then began to pack my things. When the first light of dawn broke, I took my belongings and went to E2 Makoto's place. E2 Makoto was furious. Pointing at me, he asked, Tell me now, did that woman betray you again?" I hadn't slept all night. I was nodding off from exhaustion. I shook my head at his words and said, "E2 Makoto, I agreed to it." This sentence had actually been circulating in my mind for hundreds of times lately, but it was the first time I said it out loud. I felt extremely tired. but also a bit relieved. It was like embracing the version of myself from 4 years ago who had nearly suffocated in despair while burying himself under the red sands of the Sahara. Because of betrayal, I finally spoke. I don't love her anymore. E2 Makoto, I think. I don't love her anymore. He stared at me, his mouth wide open in surprise, as if he was looking at a stranger. I went back to the Sahara once more. While standing on the vast expanse of the desert, I received a call from E2 Makoto. He hesitantly asked, "Someone came looking for you. She said she's here to take you back. She looks a lot thinner. Seems quite pitiful." But he immediately switched sides and asked, "I sent her away. When are you coming back?" Finally, as if still unwilling to give up, he struggled to ask one last question. "Are you guys really over this time? No chance at all?" I chuckled and didn't say a word. Later, E2 Makoto still betrayed me. When I returned to the country and got off the plane, I saw Liu Ryan. She had indeed lost a lot of weight, but her spirit seemed quite good. When she saw me, she smiled, looking both cautious and slightly nervous, and said, "I came to take you home." I didn't make a fuss. After getting in the car with her, I said, "Thank you. Just drop me off at E2 Makoto's place." She silently gripped the steering wheel, and after a long time, she finally said, "Okay, I was wrong. Such a proud person. I thought she must never have begged anyone like this before. I was really wrong. After you left, that house felt so empty. Without you, I couldn't stay there for even a minute." She took a deep breath, closed her slightly reddened eyes, took out a small square box from her pocket, held it out to me, and said, "Let's get married, G. Boater." Saying I wasn't surprised would be impossible. A person like her, if you were to use a metaphor, she was like the wind, coming and going freely. She had always been someone afraid of burdens. Even in the time when I loved her the most, I never once imagined that one day she would propose to me. But beyond the shock, I felt nothing else. I could never figure it out. Why the me who once loved Liu Ryan so much, who, even after being treated like that, humbled into the dust, still wouldn't let go, suddenly changed after everything had settled? I thought about it for a long time but couldn't understand, until I returned once more to the place from 4 years ago. I finally figured it out. I have never been a magnanimous person. In the torrents of time, I have always remembered those moments from 4 years ago, the despair that came from being deeply hurt, the bitter pleas and earnest entreaties, the concessions without boundaries or principles, the thoughts of despair that wished for an end to everything, fermented slowly over the 4 years of my humble reconciliation with Liu Ryan. It turns out I never truly forgot those wounds. My feelings gradually faded amidst the repetitive recollections. In the end, all that remained was the little self-respect and self-love I had left over the years. G. Boater, that boy who took so long to reflect. After such a long time, he finally, unexpectedly turned around, determined to love himself properly. When I pushed away Liu Ryan's ring, I was extraordinarily calm. I knew I would never regret this decision. I looked at Liu Ryan, shook my head, and said, both apologetically and with relief, "I'm sorry, Liu Ryan. I don't love you anymore." She seemed to have anticipated this ending. After a long silence, her eyes reddened as she smiled slightly and asked, "You don't love me now, but what about later? You don't have anyone else you like, right? If we could start all over again, would you give me another chance?" I looked at the traffic outside. Time is so long. It has healed all my insecurities and pain, giving me a complete G-boater. I have finally learned to treat love with equality. As for what comes after, who can say for sure? Resting my head against the window, I smiled slightly.